Ethan grew up in a small village, surrounded by rolling hills and open fields. His family lived in a modest house made of bricks, with a red tin roof that shone under the sunlight. Life was simple, but filled with love. Ethan's mother, Amira, was the heart of the family. She had warm, gentle eyes and always smelled of spices from the meals she lovingly prepared. She would wake up early every morning to bake fresh bread, a tradition she had learned from her own mother. His father, Yusuf, was a farmer. His hands were rough from years of working the land, but his smile was soft. He spent long days in the fields, tending to their crops and livestock. Yusuf always told Ethan, "Hard work is the key to life. If you put in the effort, the results will come." Ethan had two younger sisters, Layla and Hannah. Layla, the eldest of the two, loved to sing as she helped their mother in the kitchen. Her laughter often filled the house, making it feel alive and warm. Hannah, the youngest, was curious and energetic, always following Ethan around and asking endless questions about the world. In the evenings, the family would gather around the small wooden table for dinner. They'd share stories from their day and laugh together. Despite not having much, Ethan always felt rich in love and support. But as Ethan grew older, he began to feel restless. While he loved his family deeply, he couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to life beyond the village. He dreamed of exploring the world, learning new things, and building something of his own. One day, while helping his father harvest crops, Ethan stopped to look out at the horizon. The vast expanse of the sky seemed to call to him, whispering of opportunities far away. That night, he sat down with his parents and shared his thoughts. "Mom, Dad," he began hesitantly, "I want to go to the city, maybe even a different country. I want to find new opportunities and build a better life for all of us." Amira's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I've always known you had big dreams, Ethan. We'll miss you, but if this is what your heart wants, we'll support you." Yusuf placed a strong hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've always been determined, my son. Go, and don't forget where you come from. Remember, our door is always open." His sisters were heartbroken at the thought of him leaving, but Ethan promised to write letters and send photos. "I'll visit as soon as I can," he assured them. The sun was setting as Ethan sat on his bed, staring at the suitcase he'd packed. His small room in the village was quiet. The sounds of birds chirping outside mixed with the distant laughter of children playing. This had been his home for 20 years. "Ethan, it's time," his mother called from the door. He picked up his bag and walked outside. His father stood silently by the car, and his younger sister hugged him tightly. "Don't forget us," she whispered, tears in her eyes. At the airport, Ethan hugged his mother one last time. "You'll do great," she said, holding back her tears. "Just remember, hard work will get you through anything." Ethan boarded the plane, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. When the plane landed, Ethan stepped out into a busy city. The airport was enormous, filled with people rushing in every direction. He clutched his bag tightly, feeling small and lost. Outside, the air smelled different. The city was loud, cars honking, people talking, and music playing from shops. Ethan didn't know where to go, so he followed the crowd. He flagged down a taxi, showing the driver a piece of paper with the address of a cheap hotel. The driver spoke fast in a language Ethan didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. The hotel room was tiny, with a single bed and a flickering light. Ethan sat down, staring out the window at the glowing city lights. It felt like another planet. The next morning, Ethan woke up early and set out to find work. He walked the streets, stopping at cafes, stores, and markets. At each place he asked, "Job?" showing a piece of paper with the word written on it. Most people shook their heads. Some smiled kindly, while others didn't even look at him. By evening, Ethan's feet were sore and his stomach growled. He bought a small sandwich from a street vendor and sat on a bench to eat. As he looked around, he felt a deep loneliness. That night in his room, Ethan stared at the ceiling. "What if I can't make it here?" he whispered to himself. The next day, Ethan walked into a bakery. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. The owner, an older woman with glasses, looked at him. "Do you need something?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then said, "Job?" The woman raised an eyebrow. "Do you know how to bake?" Ethan nodded, even though he wasn't sure if his skills were good enough. She handed him an apron. "Show me," she said. Ethan worked hard that day, kneading dough and following her instructions. By the end of the day, the woman smiled. "You're not bad," she said, handing him some money. "Come back tomorrow." For the first time, Ethan felt hope. Every day, Ethan worked at the bakery. The tasks were tough, but he learned quickly. The customers spoke fast, but he picked up a few words here and there. In the evenings, Ethan went to the library. He borrowed simple books to practice the language. One day, a kind librarian named Mia noticed him struggling. "Do you need help?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yes, please," he said slowly. Mia helped him with words and pronunciation. She even taught him phrases to use at work. Ethan practiced every night, repeating words until he could say them confidently. Months passed, and life started to change. Ethan saved enough money to move into a small but clean apartment. He decorated it with photos of his family and colorful curtains to make it feel like home. At the bakery, the customers started noticing his progress. "You're learning fast," one said with a smile. Ethan beamed with pride. One evening, Mrs. Carter, the bakery owner, handed Ethan a loaf of bread to take home. "You've earned it," she said. "You're part of the family now." Ethan felt his heart warm. He wasn't just surviving, he was starting to belong. Sitting in his little apartment one night, Ethan called his family. His mother answered. "Ethan, how are you?" she asked eagerly. "I'm good, Mom," he said, smiling. "I have a job, a nice place, and I'm learning the language." His mother's voice trembled with emotion. "We're so proud of you," she said. Ethan looked out the window at the glowing city lights. This place, once so strange, now felt like a second home. He still missed his family and village, but knew he had grown stronger. As he hung up the phone, Ethan whispered, "I can do this." Ethan's days began to feel more settled. He woke up early, washed up quickly, and walked to the bakery. The walk had become his favorite part of the day. The streets were quieter in the morning, and he enjoyed the cool breeze and the smell of coffee from nearby cafes. One morning, as he arranged loaves of bread on the shelf, a regular customer, Jake, walked in. Jake was a young man who always ordered the same thing, a baguette and a cup of black coffee. "You're doing well," Jake said, smiling as Ethan handed him his order. Ethan smiled back. "Thank you, I try." Jake sat by the window and watched as Ethan worked. Later, as he left, he said, "If you ever need help with the language, let me know." Ethan hesitated but nodded. That small moment gave him encouragement. Not everything was easy, though. One afternoon, the bakery was busier than usual. Customers were lined up, and Ethan struggled to keep up. "Where's Mrs. Carter?" one impatient customer asked. She's not here," Ethan stammered, his face red. The customer sighed loudly. Ethan felt his heart race. He dropped a loaf of bread while hurrying, and another customer shook their head. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He thought about quitting. "Maybe I'm not good enough," he whispered. The next day, Mrs. Carter noticed his mood. "What's wrong, Ethan?" she asked. "I make mistakes," he said, looking down. She laughed gently. "Everyone makes mistakes. You're learning. That's what matters." Her words stayed with him. One evening, Ethan decided to call Jake. "Can you help me with English?" he asked nervously. "Of course," Jake replied. They met at a nearby park. Jake brought flashcards and snacks. They practiced for hours. Jake was patient, correcting Ethan gently and cheering him on when he got things right. To celebrate their progress, Jake bought Ethan a small ice cream. "You've come a long way, man," Jake said. Ethan smiled, feeling grateful. He realized that people were beginning to see him not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged. Weeks later, Ethan noticed a young man in the library struggling with the same things he had faced months ago. The man's name was Allie, and he had just arrived in the city. "You need help?" Ethan asked. Allie nodded. Ethan sat with him, sharing what he had learned about finding work, learning the language, and adjusting to life in the city. It felt good to help someone else. Allie smiled and said, "You're a good teacher." For the first time, Ethan felt truly confident. One quiet evening, Ethan returned to his apartment and found a package waiting for him. Inside were items from his family, homemade snacks, a scarf his sister had knitted, and a letter from his mother. The letter read, "We miss you every day, but we are so proud of what you're doing. Remember, you are never alone. Love, Mom." Ethan held the letter close to his chest. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but they were happy tears. He realized how far he had come. One day, Mrs. Carter called Ethan into her office. "I'm getting older," she said. "I can't run this place forever. Would you like to take on more responsibilities?" Ethan was stunned. "Me? Run the bakery?" "You've earned it," she said. "Think about it." Ethan spent the night thinking. He remembered his struggles, his growth, and the people who helped him. He decided he was ready. Months later, Ethan was managing the bakery. He worked hard to keep it running smoothly. Customers greeted him warmly, and he hired Allie to help out, just as Mrs. Carter had helped him. One evening, Ethan stood outside the bakery, looking at the glowing sign. He thought about his journey, from the boy who left his village with nothing but hope to the man who had built a life in this city. He pulled out his phone and called his mother. "Mom," he said, "I'm doing okay. I think you'd be proud." She laughed. "We've always been proud of you, Ethan." With Ethan now in charge of the bakery, he faced new challenges. The early mornings became routine, but managing everything, from the inventory to the staff, was harder than he expected. Sometimes the bakery was quiet, and he worried if they would be able to keep up with expenses. One afternoon, a delivery didn't arrive on time, and the bakery ran out of flour. The shelves that were usually full of bread were nearly empty. Customers started leaving without buying anything. Ethan felt his heart sink. Just as he was about to give up for the day, Allie, who was working the counter, came over. "You've got this, Ethan. Don't let one bad day stop you. People love your bread." Ethan took a deep breath and made some phone calls. By evening, the flour had arrived. He worked late, preparing fresh batches for the morning. When customers came in the next day, they were greeted with the smell of fresh bread, and the lines began to form again. Ethan realized that every day wouldn't be perfect, but as long as he kept working hard and stayed calm, he could handle anything. As months went by, Ethan began to adjust to life more comfortably. His apartment, which once felt so unfamiliar, had slowly transformed into a cozy home. He decorated it with personal items from his family, the scarves his sister had knitted, a framed photo of his parents, and a small plant that reminded him of his mother's garden back home. In his free time, Ethan started to explore the city more. On weekends, he wandered through parks, visited museums, and tried new foods. The city no longer felt as strange. He had found places he liked, and he had met people who made him feel welcome. One Saturday, he met Mia at the local market. She was shopping for ingredients to make a traditional dish. "You should come over and try it sometime," she said. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest. For the first time since arriving in the city, he felt like he was building real relationships, not just with people who were kind to him, but with people who treated him like an equal. One evening, as Ethan was finishing his work, he received a letter. This time, it wasn't from his mother. It was from his childhood friend Rami back home. The letter began, "Ethan, we all miss you here. Things are not the same without you. I hope you're doing well, and I can't wait to hear all about your life in the city." Ethan sat quietly, reading the letter. Rami wrote about the village, how his family was doing, and how everyone still talked about Ethan's big move. At the end, Rami wrote, "We are proud of you, Ethan. You've always been brave." Ethan smiled, feeling both happy and a little sad. He missed his home, but he knew he had made the right choice. He carefully folded the letter, promising himself that one day he would go back to visit. As the seasons changed, Ethan's bakery became more popular. He had built up loyal customers, and word about the delicious bread spread. One day, Mrs. Carter came to him with an idea. "How about we host a community event here? We can invite the neighbors, have some music, and give free samples of your best bread." Ethan loved the idea. He worked hard for weeks, preparing the best pastries and bread and decorating the bakery with bright flowers. On the day of the event, the bakery was filled with laughter and music. People from all over the neighborhood came to try the fresh-baked goods. Ethan felt proud watching people enjoy his work. He even spoke to a few customers in his new language without any fear. "Your bread is amazing, Ethan," a regular customer said, clapping him on the back. "That's the best I've had in years," another person added. Ethan smiled, knowing that this was his moment to shine. The event was a huge success, and by the end of the day, people were talking about his bakery all over the neighborhood. One evening, after closing the bakery, Ethan got a phone call that he wasn't expecting. It was from his mother. "Ethan, we've saved enough money. We're planning to visit you next month," she said, her voice full of excitement. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen his family in years. The thought of finally being able to spend time with them again, to show them what he had built, filled him with joy. "Mom, that's wonderful. I can't wait to see you." As he hung up the phone, Ethan felt a rush of emotions. He had worked so hard to create a life for himself here, but his roots, his family, were always with him. The day finally arrived when Ethan's family came to visit. His parents and sister stood at the airport gate, looking around for him. When they saw him, their faces lit up with joy. Ethan rushed to them, and they embraced in a long hug. "Ethan, you've grown so much," his mother said, wiping away tears. Ethan felt a wave of emotion, but he stayed strong. "I've missed you all," he said, his voice cracking. The following days were filled with sightseeing, laughter, and sharing stories. Ethan proudly showed them his bakery, and they couldn't stop talking about how successful he had become. His father even helped him in the kitchen for a day, while his sister tried baking a cake for the first time. At night, they sat together in Ethan's small apartment, talking about home, life, and the future. "You've made a name for yourself here," his father said. "We're so proud of you, Ethan." Ethan smiled, his heart full. He realized that this new life, though so different from what he knew, was now his home. As Ethan stood by the window of his apartment, looking out over the city, he reflected on everything he had accomplished. It had been a long, difficult journey, but every challenge had shaped him into the person he was today. His phone buzzed with a message from Mia. "We're all meeting up at the park later. Come join us." Ethan smiled and typed back, "I'll be there soon." He had found a place where he belonged, surrounded by new friends, a job he loved, and a community that supported him. With his family by his side, even if they were far away, he knew the future was bright. As he left his apartment and walked down the busy streets to meet his friends, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. Life was good, and the adventure was far from over. A few weeks after his family's visit, something unexpected happened. Ethan had just finished a busy morning at the bakery and was looking forward to a quiet afternoon when he got a phone call. It was from Mia, his friend from the local market. "Ethan, you won't believe this," Mia said, her voice full of excitement. "A food critic wants to come to your bakery. He heard about your famous bread and wants to write a review." Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Are you serious? A food critic?" "Yes. I'll give you more details, but be ready. He'll be here tomorrow at noon." Ethan's mind was racing. A food critic? What would they think of his bakery? The pressure was on, but Ethan was determined to make the best impression. The next day, Ethan arrived at the bakery early. He had already prepared his signature bread and pastries, making sure everything was perfect. The bakery was shining clean, the scent of fresh-baked bread filling the air. At noon, the food critic arrived. He was a man in his 40s with glasses and a notepad, dressed casually but with a serious expression. Ethan's nerves kicked in, but he greeted him warmly. "Hello, welcome to my bakery. I'm Ethan, and I'm so glad you're here." The critic smiled, nodding. "Nice to meet you, Ethan. I've heard a lot about your bread. Let's see if it lives up to the hype." Ethan led him to the counter, where he had prepared a selection of his best pastries. The critic took a bite of the fresh loaf, and for a moment, everything felt silent. Ethan held his breath, unsure of what was coming next. The critic looked up, his eyes wide. "This is fantastic. You've really mastered the art of baking." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. The critic took notes, asking about his ingredients, techniques, and inspiration. He even asked if Ethan would be open to offering his bread at local restaurants. By the end of the visit, the critic thanked Ethan and left. Ethan was on cloud 9. He had no idea what the review would say, but it didn't matter. The experience itself had been a huge step forward. A week later, the review was published online. Ethan had been checking his phone anxiously, hoping for the best. When he finally read it, his heart skipped a beat. The review was glowing. It praised Ethan's attention to detail, his dedication to using fresh, local ingredients, and, of course, his perfect bread. The critic called his bakery a hidden gem of the city and mentioned that anyone who hadn't been yet was missing out. The review also included an invitation for people to come and try the bread for themselves. Ethan couldn't believe it. His bakery was finally getting the recognition it deserved. People started pouring in, all eager to try his famous bread. Despite the success, Ethan still faced some struggles. The bakery was now busier than ever, and while he was happy for the new customers, the long hours began to take a toll on him. One evening, after a particularly hectic day, Ethan sat down on the small bench outside the bakery, exhausted. His hands ached from kneading dough and his feet felt sore. Mia, who had been helping out more lately, came outside with a cup of tea. "You've been working nonstop, Ethan. Are you okay?" Ethan sighed. taking the tea from her. "I'm fine, just tired. I love what I do, but sometimes it feels like there's never enough time in the day." Mia nodded. "Maybe it's time to get some help. You can't do it all alone." Ethan thought about it. She was right. He couldn't do everything by himself forever. He had to trust others to help share the load. After thinking it over, Ethan decided to hire another employee to help manage the bakery. He brought in someone named Laura, a local woman who had been baking for years and was looking for work. Laura quickly became an essential part of the bakery. She knew her way around the kitchen, and her warm smile made customers feel at home. With Laura's help, Ethan could focus on the things he was best at, baking and growing the business. They worked well together, and soon the bakery became even more popular. One day, while Ethan was taking a break outside, he ran into an old acquaintance from his home country. It was Sammy, a childhood friend he hadn't seen in years. Sammy had also moved to the city and was working at a nearby cafe. "Ethan, I can't believe it's really you," Sammy exclaimed, shaking his hand. Ethan smiled. "Sammy, it's been so long. How are you?" They caught up, reminiscing about old times and talking about their lives in the city. Sammy was excited to hear about Ethan's bakery and promised to stop by soon. It was a nice feeling to reconnect with someone from his past, someone who understood where he came from. It reminded him that no matter how far he went, he wasn't alone. Months went by, and the bakery continued to thrive. Ethan felt more at home than ever. He had built a life for himself in the city, surrounded by friends, success, and his work. One evening, while closing up the bakery, Ethan stood in front of the oven, looking at the bread he had just pulled out. He realized that this was his life now. The hard work, the challenges, the rewards. It was all part of his journey. He picked up his phone and called his family back home. "Everything's going well here, Mom," he said. "I'm doing great. You should come visit again soon." As he hung up, Ethan smiled to himself. He had come so far, and there was still so much more ahead of him. He had turned his dreams into reality, and with the support of his friends and family, he knew that his future was as bright as the warm bread he baked every morning. Ethan's story is one of perseverance, hard work, and the importance of community. It shows that even when faced with uncertainty and challenges, success comes from believing in yourself and the support of those around you. No matter where you start or how difficult things seem, with determination and the courage to embrace new experiences, anything is possible. And just like Ethan, anyone can find their place in the world, no matter how far from home they may be. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Ethan's story. It's a reminder that no matter where we come from or what challenges we face, hard work and belief in ourselves can lead to incredible things. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep creating these meaningful stories.